Holy God, let my words be your words, and when my words are not your words, let your people be wise enough to know the same. Amen. So in addition to being a proud father of two little ones, I'm also a cool uncle. I have a few nieces and nephews. My eldest niece, Emmeline, is now in 9th grade over in Vestavia, which makes me feel really old. But back when she was about 4 years old, she was very into rules. And she liked to come up with her own set of rules. And I wanted to share some of these rules with you this morning because they're very appropriate and probably important for some of us to follow. Rule number 1, don't flush anything but the toilet. I don't know what that was about, but it's a good rule. This one is for moms and dads. Never yell at your daughter. I don't know what was going on in the house at that time. Number 3, at no time wear a two-parted dress unless you were in a pageant. I guess that was before the midriff, phase had come around. This one we can all take to heart. Be careful where you step. This is a rule about lights. Number 5, if the power goes out, so do the lights. It's good. And this is an add-on. Don't go in the bathroom with the lights out. It's scary. I agree. Another bathroom rule, this is the bubble bath rule. Don't use too much or it will hurt your bottom. Number 7, don't try to touch the towel rack until you're at least 15 or maybe 11. Number 8, if a fish bites, your skin will grow back. Number 9, if you look in a mirror and see Emmeline, it might not be the real one. Good to know. And number 10, maybe the most important, this is about princesses. You don't ever get near one when they are busy. All right, so those are rules that we all could live by. We also heard 10 other rules this morning, if you were paying attention. We were there in Exodus as the people of Israel had fled from Egyptian captivity and they were on their own. Moses came down and he dropped the first set of commandments, but then he got the second set of commandments. And here we heard them, right? Those 10 commandments that are so very important even to us unto this day. The first 3 commandments prioritize our relationship with God. Did y'all notice that? There is one God, and we put no other before God. Number 2, do not put anything in the place of God. Sometimes we call that idol worship. Number 3, do not misrepresent God. Sometimes we say, don't take the name of the Lord in vain. Sometimes parents say, don't curse. That's the way that we might say that. But I think more appropriately, we should not attribute things to God that do not belong to God. So if we say that God hates any particular person, we are misattributing an attribute to God. God does not hate anything God has made. The next 7 are about relationships that we have with our neighbors. And number 4 is kind of this hinge between our relationship with God and our relationship with the world around us. We need rest. We are not able to work continuously as much as I may think I can. I'm supposed to take a day off, which the search committee keeps reminding me I need to take my days off. God took a Sabbath. We need a Sabbath too. Number 5, family is important, especially respect your elders. Treat people with respect, and we might expand that to say that everyone, not just our biological family, but everyone is our family. Number 6, do no murder. Nonviolence is the way. Root out all forms of violence in our lives. Number 7, do not commit adultery. Treat covenantal relationships with respect. We might go so far as to say that we are to root out lust or all objectivity of other people. Number 8, do not steal. Root out greed. Number 9, do not bear false witness, aka lying. Tell the truth in love, but tell the truth. And number 10, do not covet. Practice gratitude for what you have. Now, those are the 10 big ones that we hear repeatedly, not just in Exodus, but elsewhere in what we call the Old Testament. But those commandments are kind of like bunny rabbits, and they multiplied, and they grew in number, such that by the end of the Old Testament, when Jesus' day came, there were how many commandments? Does anybody know? 613. 613 commandments. It's hard enough to live by the 10, right? Think about having to hold up 613 rules at one time. When Jesus arrived, it was not as though these laws were to be abolished, though, by the advent of Christ. You may have heard it said that Jesus came to fulfill the law and the prophets, not to abolish them. He came to fulfill them. But still, a code of 613 rules is difficult to keep up with, let alone to follow. It might be a bit paralyzing. Often, that was what those faithful Jewish people in Jesus' day would have felt. They would have been overwhelmed by all of this. And in our Christian formation, adult Christian formation forum that we've been having during Lent, David Mize has been leading us through the last week, which is a wonderful text. And it kind of mentions a bit about this, that Jesus was not coming to replace what the Jewish people were doing. He was coming to, again, fulfill the law, not to destroy it. Now, when we get to today's gospel lesson, if you've been in that forum, this story might sound familiar, except we're not in Mark's gospel account like we have been in the forum, but we're in John's gospel account when we get to Jesus' temple tantrum. All right, y'all are supposed to laugh at that. It's not only a dad joke, it's a priest dad joke. So, all right, so Jesus has this temple tantrum on the Monday. Okay, now you got it. There you go. On the Monday of Holy Week in Mark's gospel account. But here in John, it's at the beginning of the whole story. It's because John's emphasis was that Jesus was coming to inaugurate this huge party that was going to last on into eternity. And so he was casting out the old ways and bringing in something new. And that's why he did what he did, and that's why John chose to put this story right here at the beginning of the gospel account. But Jesus was not mad at the Jewish people for being Jewish. That's preposterous and something to push against. Perhaps you all know the scholar, Dr. Amy Jill Levine, who is up at Vanderbilt. She is a scriptural scholar as well as a faithful Jewish woman. And she has been trying to help advise the Episcopal Church and others on how to make sure that we do not perpetuate anti-Semitism in our readings, especially those around Holy Week. Now, in this passage that we heard today, we heard the Jews a couple of times, but it's hard to render that translation in any other way. Jesus, again, was a faithful Jewish man. He wasn't against the practice of Judaism. He didn't come to destroy the law. He came to fulfill it. Said it 3 times now. In this passage from John, what we can discover is that Jesus was aiming to disturb what had been happening in the temple. He was worried that rule following and the worship of God had replaced justice and caring for God's people. Worship had replaced justice. When we do that, we miss the point of our faith, that we are to care for others. The 10 Commandments from Exodus and elsewhere are very much justice-focused. Still, rules, as Jesus said about the Sabbath, are made for people and not the other way around. We benefit from having these guidelines so that we know how to live in community with one another. We benefit from rules if they lead to right relationship with God, neighbor, and self. We all might be somewhat aware that Jesus summarized the law. We heard that today earlier in our service. We heard the bit from Mark when Jesus summarized all the law and the prophets in two things, right? Love God with everything and love your neighbor as yourself. But how do we love God if we are not loving our neighbor and loving the world around us? So we might break this down into three parts. We love God by serving our neighbor. You've heard of the golden rule, right? Have you heard of the platinum rule? Do you know this rule? This is the rule when we don't just care for our neighbor and love them as ourselves, but we're curious about how our neighbor might want to be loved themselves. That is going even a step farther. Implicit in love for our neighbor is love for ourselves. If we are to love our neighbor as ourselves, we are also to love ourselves. Do not neglect to treat yourself with respect and dignity. And number three, we love God by loving the creation that God has made and by treating it with such respect that we can pass it on to the next generation and the next generation and the next generation. If we replace justice, aka love in action, with empty worship, we will find ourselves in much the same place as those money changers in today's gospel lesson. Jesus may not show up and turn my vestments into a whip and drive us out of here, but we would face the same fate nonetheless. What we do in worship is meant to inspire and change us so that we will go out into the world to care for ourselves, for our neighbors, and for creation. The rules God sets before us are to provide boundaries such that we can live in right relationship with one another and know how to live in community with love and charity. As we move ever nearer to Holy Week, to Jesus' death, to the cross, may we see all the more clearly our path in following the way of Christ. May we treat others with respect and dignity so that we can reach out in love to all. May we love all our neighbors as they want to be treated. May we bless this creation so that it may be restored and healed and worth passing along to our children and our children's children. May we love God, not only by worshiping, but also by living just lives, full of God's self-giving, all-encompassing, and never-ending love. Beloveds, love. That is a commandment worth following.